In the closing years of the 8th century before the birth of Christ, the empire of Assyria stood unmatched in power. From the mountains of Urartu to the borders of Egypt, its banners marked the lands it had subdued. Its kings ruled not only with armies but with fear carefully cultivated. Cities that resisted were broken. Their walls were torn down, their people led away in chains, their names swallowed into the vast dominion of Nineveh. Upon the throne sat Sennacherib, son of Sargon II. His father had expanded the empire through relentless campaigns. And when Sargon fell in battle, Sennacherib inherited both a throne and a challenge. Rebellions stirred in distant provinces. Whispers of weakness traveled among vassal kings who had long paid tribute with clenched teeth. The new king would have to prove himself, not merely as heir, but as conqueror. Far to the southwest lay Judah, a small kingdom perched upon hills of limestone, its capital Jerusalem guarded by steep valleys and fortified walls. Years earlier, the northern kingdom of Israel had fallen to Assyria. Samaria had been besieged, captured, and its inhabitants carried away. The fate of Israel stood as a warning to Judah, whose king at that time was Hezekiah, son of Ahaz. Hezekiah had come to the throne determined to restore the worship of the Lord in his land. He removed the high places where offerings had been made upon hills and under trees. He shattered pillars dedicated to foreign gods and cut down sacred poles. Even the bronze serpent fashioned in the wilderness during the days of Moses, once a symbol of healing, had become an object of misplaced reverence. Hezekiah broke it in pieces, calling it nothing more than bronze. His reforms were sweeping, bold, and rooted in the belief that Judah's strength lay not in alliances or tribute, but in covenant faithfulness. Yet faith did not erase political reality. Assyria remained a looming force. In the early years of his reign, Hezekiah continued the practice of paying tribute, silver and gold sent eastward to ensure temporary peace. But as Assyria contended with unrest in Babylon and along its northern borders, a window seemed to open. Envoys from Egypt whispered of support for rebellion. Neighboring states weighed their options. At some point, whether through conviction or calculation, Hezekiah chose to withhold tribute. He broke from Assyria's control. It was a defiant act, one that would not go unanswered. For an empire like Assyria, rebellion was not merely disobedience. It was a threat to the order upon which its dominion depended. Sennacherib would march west to remind the nations of his authority. Thus began a campaign that would shake Judah to its core and place Jerusalem under the shadow of annihilation. Sennacherib did not move in haste, but with deliberate force. His annals later recorded that he set out in his third campaign against the rebellious lands of the west. The Assyrian army was a machine honed by decades of warfare. Infantrymen armed with spears and shields marched in disciplined ranks. Archers advanced behind protective screens. Chariots thundered across plains. Engineers accompanied them, bearing the knowledge to construct siege rams, towers, and battering rams capable of reducing even formidable fortifications. City after city in the region fell, Phoenician ports submitted, Philistine strongholds were overrun. The message was clear: Assyria's reach remained unbroken. When Sennacherib turned toward Judah, the fortified cities of the land braced for impact. One by one, they succumbed. The biblical record states that 46 strong cities were taken, along with countless smaller villages. The most significant among them was Lachish, second only to Jerusalem in strength and importance. Lachish stood upon a strategic hill, its walls thick and its gates formidable. Yet the Assyrians encircled it and began the systematic work of siege. They constructed ramps of earth and stone, gradually rising to meet the city's defenses. Battering rams pounded against gates. Archers provided cover, their arrows darkening the air. Defenders hurled stones and flaming torches, striving to repel the assault. The struggle was fierce, but Assyria's discipline and engineering prevailed. Lachish fell. Reliefs later discovered in the ruins of Nineveh depict the scene in chilling detail. Captives stripped and bound, nobles impaled, spoils paraded before the king. Sennacherib sat upon a throne outside the conquered city, receiving tribute as smoke rose behind him. With Lachish subdued, Judah's defenses were shattered. The road to Jerusalem lay open. The smaller kingdom now faced the full weight of imperial wrath. Within the walls of the capital, fear tightened its grip. Hezekiah had not been idle. Knowing the possibility of invasion, he strengthened the city's fortifications. He repaired breaches in the wall and built an outer defensive line, Towers were raised, weapons were stockpiled. Shields were prepared for those who would stand upon the ramparts. Perhaps most critical was the securing of water. Jerusalem's primary source, the spring of Gihon, lay outside the original city walls. In times of peace, its waters flowed openly. In times of siege, it posed a vulnerability. Hezekiah ordered the digging of a tunnel through solid rock, redirecting the waters into the city, where they collected in the pool of Siloam. It was a feat of engineering accomplished by men working from opposite ends, carving through stone until their tools met in the darkness. As Assyria drew near, Hezekiah addressed the people. He gathered military leaders and spoke words intended to steady trembling hearts. "Be strong and courageous," he urged. "With him is an arm of flesh. Thus is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles." His confidence was not rooted in military parity. He knew Judah could not match Assyria in strength. His appeal rested upon trust in divine intervention. Yet beyond the walls, the Assyrian army advanced. From Lachish, Sennacherib sent high-ranking officials starting Rabsaris and Rabshakeh to Jerusalem. They did not initially bring siege engines. They brought words, crafted to erode resolve before swords ever clashed. The Assyrian delegation stood near the conduit of the upper pool along the highway to the fuller's field. There representatives of Hezekiah met them, Eliakim, Shebna, and Joah. What followed was not a negotiation in private chambers, but a public confrontation designed to be heard by those stationed upon the walls. Rabshakeh spoke in Hebrew, ensuring that every guard and citizen within earshot could understand. He questioned Hezekiah's trust. "On what do you rest this confidence?" he demanded. He mocked reliance upon Egypt, likening it to a broken reed that would pierce the hand of anyone who leaned upon it. Then he turned to faith itself. He suggested that Hezekiah had angered his own God by removing high places, misunderstanding the king's reforms as an offense rather than purification. He compared the God of Israel to the gods of other nations conquered by Assyria. Had any of them delivered their lands from the king's hand? Where were the gods of Hamath Arpad, Sepharvaim? All had fallen. The officials of Judah requested that he speak in Aramaic, the language of diplomacy, rather than Hebrew. But Rabshakeh refused, raised his voice all the more, declaring promises of prosperity should the people surrender, and threatening famine and degradation should they resist. The people upon the wall kept silent, for Hezekiah had commanded them not to answer. Silence became their shield against psychological assault. Yet silence did not still the pounding of their hearts. When the officials returned to Hezekiah, their garments torn in distress, they recounted every word. The king's response was immediate and humbling. He tore his own clothes, covered himself with sackcloth, and entered the house of the Lord. In the temple courts, Hezekiah sought counsel beyond human strategy. He sent messengers to the prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, conveying the gravity of the moment. "This day is a day of distress, rebuke, and disgrace," the message read. "Perhaps the Lord your God will hear the words of Rabshakeh and rebuke them." Isaiah's reply carried assurance. He spoke of a rumor that would cause Sennacherib to withdraw, and of a sword that would ultimately end his life in his own land. It was a promise set against overwhelming odds. Meanwhile, news reached Sennacherib that the king of Cush had marched out to fight him. Whether this report demanded immediate attention or simply influenced strategy, it altered the immediate pressure on Jerusalem. Yet before departing, Sennacherib sent a letter to Hezekiah, reiterating his threats. The message was direct: "Do not let your God deceive you." Jerusalem would not escape as other cities had not escaped. Hezekiah took the letter into the temple and spread it before the Lord. His prayer acknowledged the reality of Assyria's power. He did not deny their record of conquest. He admitted that the gods of other nations had been cast into fire, for they were fashioned by human hands. But he appealed to the uniqueness of the God of Israel. "Save us," he prayed, "that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are God." Isaiah responded again, delivering a message that blended poetry and judgment. He portrayed Zion as a virgin daughter, shaking her head at Sennacherib. He declared that the king's arrogance had reached heaven. Because of his rage and pride, he would be turned back, restrained as an animal with hook and bridle. The prophecy concluded with a sign for Judah. Though fields had been ravaged, they would eat what grew of itself in the first year and plant again in the second. A remnant would take root downward and bear fruit upward. The survival of the people was intertwined with the fate of the city. The stage was set. Words had been spoken by both king and prophet. The armies remained poised outside Jerusalem's walls. The next movement would not come from diplomatic exchange or human strength, but from an event that would echo through history. The Assyrian camp sprawled across the valleys surrounding Jerusalem. Fires flickered against the darkness. Soldiers rested beside stacked shields and spears. Commanders plotted the coming siege. Confidence likely remained high. After all, the pattern of victory had been consistent. Within the city, families gathered in hushed prayer. Watchmen strained their eyes into the night. The air carried tension thick as smoke. Then, according to the biblical record, something occurred beyond ordinary explanation. In a single night, the angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When morning light broke across the hills, it revealed a field of lifeless bodies. The text offers no detailed description of method, no account of battle, no depiction of sword or flame. Whether plague, sudden illness, or supernatural judgment, the effect was decisive. The vast army that had threatened Jerusalem lay incapacitated. For those within the city, dawn brought astonishment. The enemy that had seemed unstoppable had been halted without a single arrow loosed from Jerusalem's walls. Sennacherib withdrew. He broke camp and returned to Nineveh. Jerusalem remained unconquered. Back in Assyria, Sennacherib continued his reign. He built grand palaces, their walls adorned with carvings that immortalized his victories. Among them, the siege of Lachish was prominently displayed. He described Hezekiah as trapped like a bird in a cage within Jerusalem, and he recorded tribute received. Of the catastrophic loss outside the city, his inscriptions are silent. History, however, preserves both sides. Assyrian records confirm the campaign against Judah and the siege of Lachish. The biblical account preserves the deliverance of Jerusalem. Together, they form a composite picture, a devastating invasion that stopped short of complete conquest. Years later, as Sennacherib worshipped in the temple of Nisroch, his god, his sons Adramelech and Sharezah struck him down with the sword. They fled to the land of Ararat, and Esarhaddon, another son, reigned in his stead. The prophecy spoken through Isaiah that Sennacherib would fall by the sword in his own land found fulfillment. The king who had mocked the God of Israel met his end, not on a battlefield, but in a sanctuary of his own making. The story of Sennacherib's campaign against Judah stands at the intersection of archaeology, scripture, and memory. The tunnel of Hezekiah still runs beneath Jerusalem, its inscription testifying to the meeting of stonecutters deep within rock. The reliefs from Nineveh, now fragments of a fallen empire, depict the ferocity of Assyrian conquest. Jerusalem endured. The memory of that night shaped its identity. Psalms composed in later years would echo themes of refuge and fortress, of nations raging and kingdoms tottering, while God remained steadfast. Assyria itself would not endure forever. Within a century, Nineveh would fall to Babylon and Media. The empire that had seemed invincible would become a subject of history rather than its master. Thus, the march of Sennacherib against Judah becomes more than a military episode. It is a convergence of power and faith, of human ambition and divine sovereignty. It reminds generations that empires rise and fall, that pride often precedes collapse, and that in moments when survival seems impossible, history can turn in a single night. And so the hills of Jerusalem, once encircled by Assyrian fires, stand as silent witnesses. They recall the advance of a conquering king, the prayers of a humbled ruler, the voice of a prophet, and the dawn that revealed a fallen army. The story endures, inviting reflection on where strength truly lies and how swiftly the tide of history can change. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell. More Bible figures await.